The following audio you're about to listen to are chapters 2, 6, and 17 for the Cursed Beast Chronicles, Lone Wicker. A preview into my very first outing as narrator for an official audiobook. Links to where you can pick up your own copy are in the description for both Audible and Amazon. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 2: Becoming a Monster. "Truck, now," he said with a calm he didn't feel. His wife didn't hesitate or ask. She simply picked up their daughter and walked briskly back to the family truck. Jason wasn't sure what was in the brush. A chill ran down his spine. He had a strong feeling the thing meant him and his family harm. He also knew that if he ran, the thing would charge. The only reason it hadn't moved yet was Jason was staying still. The hairs on his neck stood on end, and he began to sweat. If he ran now, his wife and child wouldn't have time to make it to the truck. He would have to wait, stand his ground. Feigning the bravery he didn't feel, he took a steadying breath. The wind rose, and he heard leaves moving. Then a twig snapped. It was approaching, using the wind to cover its movements. How smart is this thing? Jason looked out of the corner of his eye to see if Daniela and Ivy had made it to safety. That's when it happened. A sudden burst of sound from the bushes, and leaves scattered toward him as something large and black hurled itself at him. Jason felt something hit him hard in the gut, piercing his stomach and knocking him back a good 10 feet. Winded, Jason rolled onto his stomach and launched himself toward the soccer fields in a desperate attempt to draw the thing to him. But not even 2 steps in, he felt something hot like fresh slag searing across his back. He fell face first, rolling down a big hill onto the soccer field. He pushed himself to his feet. Whatever this thing is, it's fast. A white-hot, searing pain flashed across his face, and warm blood flowed into his eyes, the red fluid obscuring his vision. He hoped his wife and daughter made it out of there. Jason felt a warm, slimy substance wipe up his cheek and struck out. He hit something solid in the thin air. It was solid as a wall, but buffered by softness. Fur, maybe? A growl sounded, and he wiped the blood from his eyes. As he did, a tall, emaciated figure seemed to just materialize into view. The thing was skeletally thin, with jet-black matted fur covering it from head to toe except its face. The face was the worst part. A yellowing skull like a deer, but with the jaw of a wolf. Adorning its head was large, sharp antlers covered in blood. Jason's blood. It had a broad chest and wicked jet-black claws on all 4 of its long, thin fingers. The blue candlelight orbs of its eyes floated in deep, empty sockets, following each of his movements hungrily. Then the beast turned toward the hill where his wife and daughter were. Jason heard it too, his daughter crying. He acted without thinking, launching himself onto the back of the beast. Why aren't they in the truck? What are they doing? He clung on around the thing's furry neck. The neck fluff in his eyes and nose reminded him of a lion's mane, but far more putrid. Jason screamed and wrenched back, but the creature was way too strong. It drug him up the hill like a small child piggyback riding a bulldozer. There was nothing else he could do. Jason acted without conscious thought, his mind racing with terrible what-ifs. He bit the creature on the neck. The thing howled and reached back to grab him. Whether he caused the thing pain or just startled it as much as he startled himself with this move, he didn't know. It did, however, stop the vile beast in its tracks. Jason's arms were bruised and bloodied. He could feel a warm, sticky fluid all over the front of his body, trickling down to his belt line from his chest and stomach. His ribs felt like they were on fire. He most likely had broken 1 or 2. The thing's claws dug into him as its alarmingly flexible arms came around and hooked his shoulders. But Jason clung on harder, biting with all he was worth. Warm, putrid, thick liquid spilled into his mouth. The creature broke him loose, throwing him into the heavy metal soccer goal. Jason crumpled. The black, oil-like fluid in his mouth was foul, but somehow familiar. He had a feeling he knew the taste, and it made him angry and hungry. Then a burning feeling flowed up through him like acid in his veins. Jason fought to his hands and knees, feeling like his entire body was on fire. He heard a voice distantly say, "Are you awake?" But he couldn't tell where it was coming from. His world broke, and he no longer thought. The pain vanished. The field vanished. The very idea of anything at all, except to kill the thing that threatened his family, had faded away faster than smoke in a strong wind. His arms contorted and grew, bones crackling and ligaments snapping. The pain was unimaginable, yet it meant nothing to him. His face elongated, and he felt like it was ripping apart. Thick white fur sprouted from his entire body as his clothes tore away. Horns, black and curved back like a ram, grew on his head. His hands grew into wide paws like a bear, but with each finger being no more than a 10-inch straight black claw. His mouth was blunt and white like bone, almost beak-like. His eyes became candle-like pupils, much like the thing that attacked him, but instead of blue, they were yellow. A long tail grew out behind him, thick and powerful like an otter, yet covered in puffy white fur. The big white mane around his neck had red tips to all the fur. The new creature stood up, a little over 8 feet tall. Where once an average man had been, now stood a beast. In many ways he was like the thing he was attacked by, but bigger. His face was a skull, but smooth. His maw rounded, but with a sharp, cutting mouth that hinged where the fur started. Where the thing that had attacked him was emaciated, black-furred, and all sharp angles, he was taller by a foot, broader, and pure white. His fur was thick and fluffed out, where this thing's was matted and dirty. His paws were giant and blunt. The attackers were long-fingered like rakes. The new beast's long arms were now powerfully built. He felt strong, angry, and hungry. In his new form, he sniffed the air. His vision tinted red, and he could see a bright yellow spot on the attacker's neck. The wound he had inflicted. It had healed, but glowed bright in his vision. He felt his powerful rear legs flex like a dog's rear legs. They dug in as he lowered himself. The attacker spoke, "It is finally done," and it flew at him. The attacker seemed pathetically slow now. Its moves were sluggish and uncoordinated. He was larger, faster, and stronger. He swung out with a large paw, slapping the thing aside like no more than a pesky fly. It screeched as it rolled upright and sprang at him, but it was pathetic. He smashed it to the ground. It smelled good, and he was starving. He leaned in quickly, and his maw snapped down at it. The attacker bolted back, far faster than it had been moving. Out of anger, Jason, or what was Jason, stabbed out with razor-sharp claws, getting the thing in the belly. The black creature looked down at the claws deep in its guts and made a pitiful noise, like a sigh. The new beast felt nothing but rage for this thing and lunged forward for another bite, but the thing managed to flee like a deer bouncing lightly away. The new beast was on him in no time. He kicked out with both rear feet, putting all his weight on his thick tail. The kick landed, and long rear claws, hooked like a lion's instead of straight like his front claws, tore into the attacker, ripping its stomach open. Black fluids poured out, much like used motor oil, but thicker. "This thing is pathetic, not worth eating," the beast thought, as it jumped onto the attacker and grabbed its head. He dragged the thing to the street, breaking its antlers off on the way. The thing continued that weird noise, a crackling, breathy noise that got under the beast's skin and angered it further. He leapt over the truck in his way and landed heavily on the pavement. He then lifted its head and growled, then slammed its head into the concrete again and again. The pavement under it cracked and shattered. The skull face of the attacker cracked and bled as he slammed it with his powerful arms. Finally, with a loud crack, The thing's head smashed, covering his paws in black tar-like blood. It began to fall apart, turning into ash and blowing away.
What a waste! Not even a meal,
thought the new beast. Then something hard smashed into his bone-like face, sparking as if deflected off it. He growled, looking for the new attacker. First thing he saw was some human standing nearby looking at him. A woman and her child. They smelled good. At least he could eat something. Then there was a loud sound, and the world went black. No sound, no light, no hunger, and no pain. Chapter 2 was the audition piece, or largely the audition piece for the gig in question. Chapter 1 was also included in that, but I figured Chapter 2 was early enough and it had a bit more action involved, so I figured that would be a better sneak peek for the first bit. Chapter 2 was where I really got to play around a little bit with the monster voices. A bit more so than Chapter 1, because Chapter 2, there are 2 monsters' voices. The origin for the Wicker voice, as well as the Wendigo voice, was a recollection I had from my old days playing Halo 2. And I kind of had the idea of imitating the Gravemind, but trying to give it a bit more of a growling, animalistic tone to it, as opposed to something that was a bit more slimy and otherworldly. I used the Wicker voice as the baseline for pretty much all of the monsters that were less than human. Obviously, there's going to be a limit to how many I do, especially since there is plans for a second book in the works, and that one's going to have a bit more monsters than the first one. So we'll see how it goes, but Jason was a character that you spend the most time with, obviously. And he was both the simplest and the most difficult to voice. Not because it's complicated to voice Jason specifically, but more so the Wicker side of him. If Chapter 2 wasn't plain enough, he does turn into a Wicker later on in the book, and occasionally he has to bring out the monster voice. The difficult part were the shouting instances, and ironically enough, moments in the book where I have to be very quiet. And I had more than a couple instances where the microphone just didn't pick up the growling when I was being quiet. And when I was being loud, that just tore my vocal cords when I wasn't used to it. I got more accustomed to it, but the big hurdle was the fact that when I was shouting as the Wicker, I would often lose the gravelly, I would lose the rolling of the R's, so to speak. So that was a bit of a challenge. So, yeah. Chapter 2 is obviously a bit more action than anything else, but later on you get a bit more personality, I'd say. Which I think is a good enough jump-off point for Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Past Life. The Monday prior to the attack. The alarm blared, playing that dumb song I hate so much about some guy walking 500 miles. I set it to wake me up because I wouldn't sleep through it. I forced my head off the pillow and grabbed for the phone, contemplating breaking it for a second till I remembered how much these stupid pieces of machine brilliance cost me. I managed to finally grab the damn thing and turn off the alarm, as I did every morning, praying that it didn't wake Daniela. She stirred a bit, but didn't wake up. Another successful escape. I groggily stumbled around the room with less coordination than a drunk. I grabbed my clothes and my old ragged boots and left the bedroom. The smooth, well-worn leather felt like suede from years of use. Daniela hated these boots. She would always ask why I wouldn't just buy new ones. I told her it was because breaking in boots was never fun, and these were comfy. But it was also because these are familiar. They felt like an old friend every time I laced them up. I sighed and looked out at the yard, with its halfway fenced-in section. I told Danielle I would fix it up so we could get a dog. Honestly, I have been putting it off because I didn't want to get a dog. I love dogs, but they don't like me. Every dog I have ever come across would growl and nip at me, or whine and run away like I was going to kill it. I got out to my old beat-up pickup and got in. Screw new shoes. I needed a new truck. I cranked the old gal over, wondering to myself why everyone refers to their trucks as old gals, and it fired up. For 3 seconds, and died. Dang it, not this morning! I cranked it again and prayed, stomping the gas pedal and rubbing the dash. It started up and began a heavy, labored idle. I pulled down the gravel drive and ran up the road to the main road. This tiny town was asleep still, which made it a pleasant drive. This town is so small there aren't even traffic lights. I turned on the radio, just to remember it broke 2 days ago. Guess I'll just sing to myself. As if God himself dropped a hard no, I hit a huge bump, and the radio started playing. Okay, I want $1 million, a killer bod, and more hair. Oh, also to be taller, or I'll start singing. The radio played a country song about being careful what you wish for. Guess you don't have a sense of humor this early. I rolled up to the interstate, and then only one exit up. I work at a welding shop, doing agricultural welding mostly. But once in a while I get a big gig, and get to go to a job site for a big weld. Those pay time and a half if I have to leave the city. Today was one of those days. I pulled into the shop, transferred my goods to the other truck, and left for the job site. Jobs like this were the only reason I'd ever wake up this early. After 12 hours of hard work and yelling profanities just to make sure the foreman would leave me alone, I went home. Daniela had beaten me there. She worked in town and only had an 8-hour shift. She had picked Ivy up off the bus, and they were waiting on the large front porch for me. As I stepped out of the truck, thunder rolled overhead, and I cursed the rain for ruining my lawn care plans, but only half-heartedly. I hate mowing the huge yard, and giving the ever-growing grass a withering scowl, and I wished it death. It didn't work. Ivy sprinted down the path and almost bowled me over. She looked up, smiling ear to ear.
"Can we go to the park today?"
she said with that cheesy grin only a kid can pull off. I sighed. I hated telling her no, and knew her mother had told her to ask me so she could avoid it. Well, why don't you ask your Before I could finish the sentence, she said,
"Mom said to ask you first."
I eyed my wife and gave her the finger behind Ivy's back. She returned it, pretending to trace a tear down her face with her middle finger while mouthing, "Don't make her cry." I looked Ivy in those amazingly green eyes that reminded me of the dense forest, and broke the news. Well, hon, I wish we could, but unfortunately your mom's just too sick to leave the house. My wife looked confused, and Ivy looked worried.
"What? Mommy seemed fine earlier,"
Ivy said, looking back at her mother. Oh, well, sometimes adults hide their sickness so their kids don't worry, I said, putting on my super sad face. It would seem Mommy has a case of bitchitis. It's most likely lethal, I said, and looked up. Daniela tried not to laugh, and spun and ran off into the house, yelling, "You are so in trouble, mister!" She shut the door on us. Well, Peanut, looks like she needs bed rest. Let's go make sure she is... Before I could finish, I heard the lock click. Oh, that lovely woman. I ran to the door with Ivy, and together we banged on it, yelling for Daniela to open the door. Only when I began climbing in through the window did she fling open the door and get me in the ass with a dart gun, before taking Ivy back inside and locking the door again on me. "You little traitor!" I yelled at Ivy. I could hear her giggling through the door. "I'm going to huff and puff and offer you $20 to open the door." Ivy was a smart kid. The door was open with her little hand preceding her as soon as I mentioned the money. I paid my child $20 to get in, and we went off to make dinner. The flashback sequences were when I really actually hammered home my decision for how Jason could talk, or should talk. Because I sort of realized that if I were to just voice Jason as myself, and just myself, yeah, that would work. But what if I did something a little different? Even using Jason as basically my own voice, what if I changed his cadence a little bit? What if I changed the octane a little bit? Or the pitch? What if I were to do that a little bit? Well, for starters, it opens up a bit more options for other characters to have similar voices. If I already have a slight variation to Jason, that'll make it easier in the long run as well. So there's that for you. There are a handful of flashback sequences, largely used to flesh out a little bit more about who Jason was before the events of the story, but also to compare and contrast how his life was and what he wants to the life he's forced into now. Chapter 6 is not my favorite flashback scene. I'll let you try and figure out which one that is ultimately, if you choose to get the book. But I decided to use 6 as the preview because it's the first one. And it's all on its own. If memory serves, every other flashback chapter is intercut with other events in the story. And I kind of wanted to leave things a bit more simplistic for a preview purposes. So it works. I think, therefore I am. I think that the main benefit of having these flashback sequences is that it also allows a break from the action. It allows a reprieve from more serious, hey, this is a world where you're fighting monsters now, kid. You gotta... Life sucks, get over it. And these moments where you just get to look back and see a family man, I think is a much needed break of pace. Change of pace. So, but the benefit that I gained from the flashback sequences was finalizing how Jason spoke and what he sounded like. Because obviously, because it's a break from third person into first person, everything needs to sound a bit more like a reminiscing. It needs to sound like someone who's really thinking back on the good old days, and inherently that has to be different from a third person perspective. It just does. So it forced me into finalizing how Jason sounded, and I like that. I like that it kicked me in the ass. Got it in gear.
Chapter 17 of Monster and Men. The crew of soldiers and Jason arrived at the delivery site in Illinois 2 days after the briefing. It was warm out, and the sun shone brightly as they exited the private planes Arthur had fly the crew out to this middle-of-nowhere airport. Corn as far as the eye can see. Corn increases humidity, they say. The leaves give off tons of evaporated water to keep the ears from drying out. This tidbit of information was delivered by the crew's resident internet prowler of useless information, Private Alan McDornell, Jason's favorite private. Shut up, Private, that can't be true, Higgs grunted. I read it online, Alan said defensively. Oh, then it must be true. All the information on the internet is true. Think about it, Private. You hunt monsters, work for a shadow government organization, and have a pet beast that is an urban legend. And you believe the internet? Higgs poked a thick finger at Private McDornell, but the young man just looked back at him and said simply, You believe in Wendigos, Sasquatch, shadow government, and ghouls, but you can't believe corn raises humidity? Jason and Rivers laughed. Higgs looked pissed and walked off to get his men together. "Are we together today?" asked MacDonald to Jason and Rivers.
"No, you and the Alpha team are with the Illinois crew. I'm going solo with Jason to find the ghoul. You are all going to take on the Enfield Horror. We will join you later. Do not engage. Only track and report,"
Rivers told MacDonald, and turned to walk away. Jason patted MacDonald's shoulder. "It's okay. There's enough of me to go around. You can have some later." The private punched Jason for that comment and laughed, walking off to join Higgs. Jason caught up with Commander Dean Rivers in one of the beat-up trucks. "Ghouls, huh?" he asked, and Rivers started up the rickety old truck.
"Yeah. Figured just us will be enough. And then we will circle around behind this horror thing and get it from the rear."
Jason made a face at the comment. "What?" Rivers asked. "I'd rather not do anything to a creature called Horror's rear end." Rivers punched Jason. It hurt way worse than MacDonald's hit.
"Shut up and get your game face on,"
Rivers commanded. Jason knew he was telling him to transform, but he had another idea. Ghouls are skittish unless they think they have a good opportunity, or they have the upper hand. "I have a plan," Jason said, and leaned back in the truck riding along with his eyes closed. Rivers smirked and sped up a bit. Jason's plans were often dangerous, reckless, and a disaster, but they were fun and often ended up working. The creature inhaled deeply through his skull-like nose. The gray-blue, mottled flesh around his nose wrinkled on his flat face, and his wide jaws stretched open in a triumphant smile. The ghoul was on the hunt, and had found 3 feasts that day. The gluttonous beast smelled more human, and licked his lips with a blistered purple tongue. His distended stomach groaned with the insatiable hunger of his kind, and he gripped the branch he was perched on a little tighter. The humans were close.
"They smell strongly of sweat. A meal before I head off north to the grouping of humans up there. Shouldn't take long,"
the hungry ghoul thought to itself. He leapt with ease from limb to limb, showing an amazing amount of agility with his elongated limbs. It wasn't long before he was on the humans. He watched them from the concealment of the leaves in his tree. There were 2 of them. One was a tall, burly man with gray hair and a neatly cut goatee. He was equipped with the heavy clothing of the soldiers, as well as guns. The other was a broad-chested man, a little shorter, but just as muscled, if not a little more. He had normal clothes on and no guns.
"So a soldier and a civilian."
The ghoul smiled to himself. He would have to dispatch the soldier first. He was the only danger. The 2 men had stopped and were talking. The unarmed man seemed scared and kept looking around. The eager ghoul almost pounced right then, but he had to master his impulse. If he jumped now, the man with the guns would shoot him down. The ghoul was tough and could heal quickly. Bullets were not life-threatening, but they were none the less painful, and a well-aimed shot could cripple him. The smaller man shook his head and said something, and looked back. His eyes locked onto the black eyes of the ghoul. The man's eyes were an eerie yellow color, and the ghoul swore they locked onto him. Every fiber of him wanted to run, flee, get as far away from here as possible. Those eyes, that look, his instincts screamed danger.
"This man is danger. Run now. Eat later. That man. No. That thing is death,"
screamed the voice in his head. He shook it all off with difficulty. He was hidden in the trees and several yards away. There is no way that man could see the ghoul in this late afternoon dimming sun. The ghoul silently crawled around to a new perch, just in case. For a split second he thought those golden yellow eyes were on him, but when he looked fully, the man had turned the other way. The 2 men talked another second and separated, walking down different routes.
"Perfect."
The ghoul stalked the unarmed man first. Easy prey. He will take him down quickly and quietly. Once he deals with this one, he can circle back and get the soldier. Once he was a good way from the soldier, he took his chance. The ghoul leapt through the air at the man. The man started to turn, but it was too late for him. The ghoul's sharp claws extended in front of him, ready to slit this man's throat and silence him forever. Then sky, ground, sky, ground, sky, and darkness. Jason sighed, looking at the ghoul's body lying lifeless and beheaded. The ghoul's all-black eyes stared blankly into the clearing above them. Rivers came through the clearing nearby. He had waited in the brush for the attack. The plan had worked. Lure the thing out, and Jason would kill it. He didn't have the time for a transformation in the short time that the ghoul leapt, but he had been training for this. His left arm was the beast's arm. The rest of him was human. This transformation felt weird, but was less painful and way faster than a full change. His huge claws had slashed the thing's arm and head off in a single flick. He looked down at the spreading dark, blood-like substance Arthur called Wicker and noticed bright red blood in it as well.
The blood of his victims. Must have killed recently,
Rivers said, looking at the ghoul without expression. Jason flexed his monster arm and looked at the black claws. They glistened with the ichor, and Rivers nodded, saying,
"Better clean that off. Ghoul blood is highly dangerous and infectious."
Jason looked a bit queasy now and went to a tree. He sank his claws easily into the wood and slid them through, cleaning his claws before turning to Rivers.
"They are Tier 5 then?"
Rivers nodded. Tiers were not a measurement of strength, but more like a listing to inform how to kill and not be killed. He had learned that Tier 1 was safe. They could still hurt or kill, but they won't attack unless provoked. Tier 2 were human-shaped things. Same height, weight, and physical appearance, but they were dangerous. Most were hags, or some kind of human with a curse to make them stronger or faster. Tier 3 was plant-based, living wood and plants. Tier 4 was cursed objects, things that carried curses, like the knife used on Jason. Tier 5 was infectious, like werewolves, vampires, and ghouls. They could infect others with their curse and make others like them. Tier 6 were incredibly dangerous creatures that required cautious planning to take down, like Wendigos and the Enfield Horror. The last tier was 7. It was called God Tier. The name was misleading. The things were not thought of as gods, just that they would send you to him. The only instructions in the handbook on what to do if encountered was one word: pray. Jason was in this tier, and though he felt a little proud of it, it also made him feel separated from the team.
"Let's get a move on. We need to find this horror thing and do stuff to his rear, as you so elegantly put it."
He motioned to Jason and began walking. Jason caught up to him and walked alongside him, still looking at his monster arm. Then at Rivers. "Hey, Rivers, over the last 2 years, I've noticed that out of everyone in the RTA, you treat me as an equal. A human. I appreciate how close we have gotten, and I feel like you and Dr. Vetty are my only friends. Thanks, but why?" Rivers looked at Jason's arm and back up to his face with a blank look. Over the nearly 2 years that they had worked together since the attack on the pack, they got close. Rivers always treated Jason like his comrade in arms, a battle buddy. Even in his beast form, he still seemed to act like he was still Jason. Even Daniela hadn't managed to continuously do that. She was a bit better now, even forcing Jason into a shower in his beast form to shampoo his fur. But she still seemed to hesitate now and again, even flinching at his touch when he was a wicker beast. Rivers took a deep breath and looked at Jason.
"You are who you are. It doesn't matter the size or shape. I've seen how you act. That's what I judge you on."
He looked off into the trees and nodded.
"The truck was this way."
Jason listened to Rivers and nodded, but he felt there was more to it. "Yeah, that means a lot to me to hear, but still I'm a monster. Even my wife flinches at me sometimes." As Jason said this, Rivers stopped and chuckled. "What are you laughing at?" Jason got a bit upset by this reaction. Rivers shook his head.
You are not a monster. At least not from what I've seen. Me and Arthur are close. I follow the man and respect him. He and I are similar in many ways, but I disagree with him on one thing. Monsters are not born. They are made. You are no monster. I am.
Jason stopped walking and stared at the soldier's broad back. Rivers stopped and saw Jason staring dumbfounded at him.
No, I'm not a beast like you. I'm a human.
But I am a monster. Rivers turned back and started walking again, and Jason started following him. How can you be a monster? You save people from monsters, Jason thought out loud. Rivers stopped and sat on a large rock and pulled a cigarette from his pocket, taking his time to light it.
You know I was in the military. I believed I was doing good, saving our country from threats, even if some of the things we did seemed a bit questionable. Then after the military, I was in a private militia, a mercenary. There I couldn't use the same excuses, and our actions were far worse. But I told myself we were still doing good by taking out people who deserved it. Murderers, tyrants, and killers. After that, I became an assassin. I ran out of excuses at that point. There was no convincing myself I was a good man, but I lost my conscience by then. No, not lost it. Just quit listening to it.
Jason listened to the old soldier talk. He looked older than Jason had ever seen him, as if he was aging before his very eyes. Rivers took a long drag and carried on.
Eventually, an old contact from my military days, Higgs, told me about the RTA. I could do real good. But things started changing not long after I joined. I thought there could be no harm in killing monsters. My conscience was clear. That's till I met her.
Rivers shook his head and put out the little he had left in a cigarette and began back toward the truck, Jason following, wrapped in his tail.
I was on a job, working with a team tasked with some forest creatures that were attacking people in the woods of Pennsylvania. We had flamethrowers and were told the things we hunted were living trees, Tier 3. I ended up wandering away from my group as we spread out to search for these things.
Rivers stopped here and pulled another cigarette out, before shaking his head and putting it back. He continued,
I almost gave up when I came up on one. She was a woman. Her skin was fair like birchwood, and her hair was soft and flowed like a willow's branches. It was brown as oak bark. Her eyes were as deep green, like the forest she called home. She saw me and tried to run, but fell.
Jason saw the pain in Rivers' eyes as he talked. He wanted to stop him, or comfort him, but he didn't know what to say, so he let him continue.
I pointed the flamethrower at her, but hesitated. She looked at me like most people, as you have seen, look at monsters. The terror in her eyes stopped me. I couldn't do it.
Rivers sighed and shook his head, looking at his feet, slowing his pace.
I lowered the flamethrower and watched her. She was a wood nymph. She asked me if I was going to kill her. I said I hadn't made up my mind. She then told me I was boring her, so she would rather I burn her than make her lay there as I ogle her. I think it was her attitude that made me like her.
At this comment, Rivers smiled wistfully, and took a second, lost in thought. He suddenly picked up the pace back towards the truck, and continued his story.
We talked for a bit. She was less of a monster than me. Her and her people had killed a lumberjack on accident trying to scare them away. He had attacked and killed a few of them, and they thought they would scare him and his crew away. But things got crazy. They had to fight for their life. I believed her. She didn't seem to want to hurt anyone. I told her to leave, run. Before she left, she gave me her name, Azalea. I will never forget her.
Rivers now looked at Jason in the eye with a hard stare. She made me realize that not all beasts are monsters, and made me question Arthur's ideology of kill all beasts.
So like I said, you are no monster. I am. And you gave me a chance, so I will give you one.
Remember this if nothing else I say gets through that thick skull you got. Sometimes we face monsters, other times we become monsters for the things we love. But monsters aren't those who do terrible things. Monsters are the ones who feel no remorse. They arrived at the truck and Rivers climbed in and pulled out his keys. Jason watched him, unable to say anything. He returned his arm to its human form a while back, and now looked at the curse mark. Rivers was the first person he ever met who didn't hate beasts on principle. This was a refreshing point of view, and Jason felt a lot better. He hopped into the truck and waited for Rivers to roll out.
The author and I went back and forth on which chapters would be the best to serve as a preview into the novel itself. Not because we necessarily disagreed with things, but because we both kind of had these different ideas on, okay, well, do we want to have a lot more action? Do we want to have more contemplative moments? And I decided that chapter 17 was going to be the right one before I decided on chapter 6, actually. We always knew, I should say, that chapter 2 would be a good starting point because it features the monster voices, it has action, and it really hammers home the fact that this is a modern world with mythical and urban monsters. So that one was a given, but we had to really think about which other chapter, and eventually chapters, because I decided I'm going on 3. And chapter 17 eventually popped out to me while I was editing. Because, well, number one, it has a monster voice in it. So be prepared. So I like that one. I was very proud of that particular monster variation. But the big driving point about it was that it kind of met all of the suggestions inside this one chapter. It does contain action, and it does contain introspection. This is the chapter where we're exploring the mentality of a character that becomes pretty important relatively early on in the story. Dean Rivers. I almost said Jason for a second. Yes, Jason Rivers. There's a lot of Jasons in this book. But eventually, the question does have to be asked, what makes someone truly a monster? Because the protagonist becomes a monster to fight other monsters. And so, well, what makes you good? What makes you bad? He's not exactly openly welcome by the organization early on in the book, because every single monster that they've really come across has wanted to kill other humans. So he has to earn his place. Rivers, however, is the only human that, after Jason was given a chance, he's the only person in the organization that pretty much instantly took to him. Never doubted him ever since, and he will defend Jason from pretty much anybody. And in chapter 17, we finally learn more or less why that is. And we get a different opinion from Rivers himself as to what really classifies as a monster. So I liked that. I like stories where characters actually have discussion on morality. Obviously, it can go too far with certain books and just certain stories in general, really. But it's better to have characters that have differing opinions who are on the same side than to have everyone with the exact same opinion. It's always better to have that, for the most part. Pretty much always. Pretty much always. I know the chapter 17 was a bit longer, but hey, sometimes you get long chapters. But there you have it. You've got chapters 2, 6, and 17. And hopefully this little collection of previews have sparked your interest. Because, well, it's my first outing. and I want to make more of them. So, once again, the links are in the description for both the Audible link and the Amazon link. I hope you check them out. And let me know if any of you are from the UK, because the book was officially published, both the author and myself were given tickets, basically, that we can send to people for review copies. So the only people I know are in the US. I don't know anyone from the UK. So if you're from the UK, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to send you the link, the code, in such a way that no one can steal it off you. But with that said, I hope you enjoy.